Section 5.5 is pretty straightforward, pretty limited information, but essential information. And I say this, I don't always like to, but kind of stuff that pops up on standardized tests. So if one side of a triangle is longer than the other side, then the angle opposite that longer side is larger than the angle opposite the shorter side. Hard to know, I know from the text, we'll explain in a minute. If one angle of a triangle is larger than another angle, then the side opposite the larger angle is longer than the side opposite the smaller angle. And then finally, the third and most important part, I think, and one seems to get overlooked, the sum of the lengths of any two sides of a triangle is greater than the third. So A plus B has to be greater than C in order to make a triangle. So let's see what they're talking about. Here are three angles, obviously in a triangle. And this angle is the largest, so this has to be the largest side. And then the next largest side is B, because that's the next largest angle. And then the next largest side is C. So they say the measure of angle C is less than the measure of angle B is less than the measure of angle A. Therefore, the side opposite AB must be less than AC, must be less than BC. In my case, I would have just said that A is greater than B is greater than C. Either way, they all make sense. So that's what this was saying. If one angle is larger, then the side opposite is larger. Largest angle, largest side. And vice versa is true. Largest side has to be across from the largest angle. Oh, I see. They say least to greatest. So in this case, the least, the measure, so since DF is the smallest, EF is the next largest, DE is the greatest, the angles would be angle E must be less than angle D, must be less than angle F. Pretty straightforward. Smallest angle across from the smallest side. So if you were given these problems, write the measurements of the triangle in order from least to greatest. So least to greatest, the measure of angle A is less than the measure of angle C, is less than the measure of angle B. Therefore, BC has to be less than AB, has to be less than AC. The side across from the smallest angle, BC, has to be less than the next largest side, BA, less than the next largest side, AC. And of course here you could just solve for the third angle. 72 plus 39 is what, 111? And so what's left? 180 minus 111 is 69. So that angle has to be 69. So again, what are the largest sides? This has to be, well, this side would be the smallest. GI would be less than GH, would be less than IH. Think you guys can handle that? Yeah. Which angle would be the smallest? The measure of angle E would have to be less than the measure of angle F, would have to be less than the measure of angle D. Okay, let's look at this idea of any two sides. The sum of any two sides has to be greater than the third. So in this case, let's look at a couple of these. Suppose I have 4 and 10 feet. Think about it. If I have one side that's 4 and one side that's 10, if I make that angle 0, the largest that they could stretch out to is 14. So it has to be, so 4 plus 10 has to be less than 14, and 10 minus 4 has to be greater than, 10 minus 4 has to be greater than 6. So the third side, let's call it x, has to be greater than the difference, 6, but less than the sum, 14. I have to be greater than the difference, what's 25 minus 9, and I have to be less than the sum, 25 plus 9. So x has to be between 34 and 25 minus 9 is 16. And you can't be equal to, right? Because if 14 plus 10 plus 4 is 14, that's the biggest it could stretch out to. And that'd be a straight line. So just less than, not less than or equal to. And they give you an example here in the study guide where I don't know what x is. So in this case, the triangle is one side of 13 and another 16. Describe the possible lengths of the third side. So the sum of any two has to be greater than the third. So x plus 13 has to be greater than 16. If we assume 16 is the largest. And if 13, if x is the largest, 13 plus 16 has to be greater than x. I would have just said 16 minus 13 equals 3. X has to be greater than 3. 13 plus 16 has to be 29. X has to be less than 29. Greater than the sum, less than the sum, greater than the difference. All right, that's section 5.